Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to day 8 of the South Asia Lectures 2025. Uh, Today, we're here to listen to Melani Gunathilaka talk about Sri Lanka. I'm going to introduce her now. Melani Gunathilaka is a climate and political activist. She's a co-founder of Climate Action Now Sri Lanka and a member of the Debt for Climate Global Movement. Melanie works as a researcher with the Law and Society Trust and a research collaborator with Sri Lanka's Institute of Political Economy and as a consultant with Greenpeace South Asia. She is also a writer and translator with experience working with local communities and social enterprises on sustainability. Melanie advocates for grassroots consultations in climate policy, prioritizing farmer, plantation fisher communities, and indigenous voices over top down decisions by financial institutions. Melanie critiques adaptation heavy strategies that ignore mitigation, carbon focused views, and profit driven approaches, advocating holistic solutions for biodiversity, food sovereignty, traditional knowledge, linking climate justice to social justice. Over to you, Melanie. Looking forward to listening.
Thank you so much, Swarna, and thank you everyone for joining today as well. So I'll start with the presentation without taking too much time. I assume that all of you are aware that Sri Lanka is currently recovering from the impacts of Cyclone Titwa, which has taken hundreds of lives, and we still don't have a correct figure of deaths. It varies between 470 to 700. Somewhere, like some media has reported 800 deaths, but we still are recovering some of the people or the bodies, unfortunately. So I want to highlight that before we go deep into this. So I hope to. I have divided this into a few sections to understand, because what we're talking about, climate change is not like one direct topic. This is there are intersectionalities within various aspects. Definitely, I'm not going to cover everything here, but I'll try to structure the presentation in a way that it would make sense for everybody. One of the things is that, Sri Lanka's, it's important to understand the landscape of Sri Lanka as well. We are a small island that is with 65,000 square kilometers. But within this small area of land, we have three major ecoclimatic zones: the wet zone, dry zone, and the intermediate zone. This means very diverse biodiversity and ecoclimatic zones. So within few hours, you can go from wet zone to dry zone to the intermediate zone, which has different biodiversity. And also the social structures are also different. We have different ethnic groups like Sinhalese, Tamils, Muslims, Burghers. So people are spread across the island, usually within their own sort of villages. We have Sinhala villages, we have Tamil villages, Muslim villages, and especially when it comes to cities, all of these people live together. So I think when we talk about Sri Lanka, it's important to understand the biodiversity and the diversity in the ecosystems and the diversity of the people as well. So here I have listed down some of the important points about Cyclone Titwa. I would like to think of this as a turning point, an incident that has called for us to understand climate crisis better, and also to focus a little more on climate justice, which we haven't done yet. And like I said, the deaths, we have experienced nearly 600 deaths, and there's 100 still missing, and more than 233,000 people are displaced and are in shelters. And about economic losses. We have more than 41,000 homes are damaged, and agricultural land have been destroyed, and food security is at 6.3 million that they have estimated. And I'd also like to look at the non-economic losses, though we haven't started quantifying or looking at non-economic losses yet. But this should include cultural heritages, biodiversity, and the social losses as well. And something also important to understand, or how we can link this disaster to climate change, is that since Sri Lanka is an island that's located closer to the equator, we don't usually get cyclones. It's quite rare that we experience cyclones. But this time, within 24 hours, there was more than 400 millimeters of rain falling in. And uh, and this didn't only impact the coastal areas or just some areas of the line, but it impacted the whole island this time. And another thing I wanted to highlight here is that I know a lot of people do talk about disaster preparedness, but something that we really experienced here was communication failures. All of the major telecommunication providers in Sri Lanka are privately owned. There was a government-owned telecommunication provider, which is 50% owned by the private sectors. And within while this disaster happened, the communication were completely cut off. There were villages that couldn't be contacted even after 4 or 5 days after the disasters as well. So this had a major impact on rescue missions. And if there was electricity or if there was communication, the people who needed support could have informed, and the rescue groups could have reached these groups and understand where they were at. So this was like a major failure in terms of responding to the disaster. And I'd like to look a little bit on how these disasters, like the Twa, were amplified through unsustainable development. In Sri Lanka, we have seen a pattern of policy that was focused at development. And when I say development, I mean the development as defined by the West, or as defined by outside. And during colonization also, especially the British colonization, we saw how lots of land was deforested, especially in the Central Highlands. These were used for tea or rubber plantations. Still majority of the lands in the Central Highlands that are on plantations produce tea. And these tea are exported. And the other thing is the laborers who work in these tea estates do not have even the basic requirements met. They don't have land rights, they don't have addresses, and they don't have proper health or education facilities. So this is one example how colonial industries impact or exploit labor on one hand, and exploit the environment on the other hand. And the other one is Mahavali and the other larger development projects. Majority of these development projects were also linked to debt. And they did not look at the long-term environmental sustainability. Mahamavali project was actually supposed to be a much longer project, which was then fast-forwarded through the politicians. But what happened was, because of this, there was no proper time given for the environment to adapt. And also we've seen hydropower tunnels and roads cutting through slopes, and without really looking at how the how suitable these are for the landscape of the island. And another thing is we've quite commonly seen land grabs and illegal constructions that were allowed through political patronage as well. Mm-hmm. So Sri Lanka's climate risk landscape places us time to time within the top 10 most climate vulnerable countries. And because we are a tropical island, we do see extreme rainfalls and road cycles that keep intensifying year on year. We have, I mean, most of the floods that we see in Sri Lanka are seasonal. But how we approach floods or how we experience floods have changed drastically. Say that 20, 30 years ago, especially within the low-lying lands or in the coastal areas, people welcomed the floods because floods were what nutritioned the soil when it comes to paddy fields or the agricultural lands. But now the floods, what they do is polluting the land in a way that it can't be used again. So how people approach floods and how floods happen and the impacts of floods also have changed. So I think it's important to understand that within the seasonal environmental incidents that we see, how these keep continuing to how the incidents end up being more and more extreme, and not only that, but also how plastic pollution and the agrochemicals um, have impacting these impacting the end results of these natural disasters as well. Rising temperature do harm paddy yields, and we have seen sea level rise and ocean warming. We have over 4,000 families living in the coastal areas. And Sri Lanka is also like a biodiversity hotspot. We're one of the 35 biodiversity hotspots in the world. So this also one of the reasons that we are like, completely cut off geographically as an island, which means our endemism when it comes to plants and species are quite high. And I would also like to look a little bit on the structural drivers of our policy. And the colonial angle of development or the colonial definition of development is based on extractivism. Like I mentioned earlier, the plantations dispossessed lands, and it also disrupted food systems. And throughout, we have seen how our food systems and our food patterns have changed. I mean, we still, I mean, our current focus on food is also less focused at the needs of the people, but it's more focused on exports because we are also in a economic crisis where we have to prioritize the economic growth over anything at the moment. And in the when we look at the historical policies or historical decisions that have taken, the export oriented rails or roads, they were focused on exporting these yields that were supposed to be exporting these yields, instead really looking at how these roads or railways are going to benefit the people, right? And these also dismantled the traditional social structures, as in we've had these village structures where they were more community-led and community-oriented, and also people used to farm on their lands. But with colonization, there were changes into who owned the land. And also with the, especially with a lot of the rules and the regulations brought in by British, meant that a lot of people lost access to their own lands. And also the other thing is, like, we've seen a lot of development projects, especially ones like Galloya Valley Development Project, Mahavalley Development Project, Uma Oya. All of these development projects also ended up contributing to internal migration, which means people had to leave their lands, letting these development projects take over. And how these impacted the landscape can be quite this didn't only impacted the landscapes, but also had a major impact on the social structures and the connection that people had to the lands also. And we've also seen how monocrops eroding sovereignty, like the food sovereignty and the seed sovereignty people had. Sri Lanka had hundreds of varieties of traditional rice varieties, which some of them have completely disappeared now. And the other angle that I wanted to look at through this is the post-war mega projects and eco-colonization. Due to the 30 years of ongoing ethnic war, there were parts of the island, especially the north and east, that didn't see a lot of development in terms of infrastructure development. But after the war, we saw many mega projects happening in these areas, like be it Hambantota, be it in other areas. There were highways that were cut through wetlands. There were also lots of white elephant projects that didn't really ended up contributing to the economy, but also impacting the social lives through increasing human wildlife conflict on one hand, because there were lots of deforestation of elephant habitats and wildlife habitats for these projects, and on the other hand, the lot of the loans that we got were spent on this, which means our debt burden kept increasing in addition to our climate risks. And for tourism zones, there were deforestation, and also some of the hydropower projects and the dams destabilized the hills. And especially after the economic crisis that happened in 2022, we see lots of projects pushing to removal of red tape or making the country more investor friendly. What this means, on the other hand, is weakening the regulations that are kept or that are placed to protect the environment. And I told Swarna earlier also that I would like to talk a little bit on debt and policy in addition to the colonization aspects, because most of the decisions that are currently being taken in Sri Lanka is prioritizing the economic growth, because we are in a debt crisis, and our goal, as suggested by the IMF, is getting back to the place where we can start repaying our debts and we can start borrowing from the markets again by 2029, right? So that was our goal up until a few weeks ago. And in 2022, we had default after $35 billion of debt that we couldn't repay. And IMF provided us with an extended fund facility, which also means that we had to cut our subsidies, and there were pushes for privatization, and there are revenue targets that we need to hit. But this IMF debt sustainability analysis completely overlooked climate vulnerabilities of the country, and they were mainly focused on fiscal targets. And we've seen the social spending is 0.6%, or less than 0.6% of GDP. And there were indirect pushes. There were pushes for indirect privatization of state-owned enterprises through public-private partnerships. So this is from Ceylon Electricity Board to the National Airlines. And the other thing is, we do need to acknowledge that there are failures within the government, or with the previous governments, and even probably within the current government also, in terms of managing these state-owned enterprises. There have been large amount of corruption, and there have been massive mismanagement. But the solution that is being presented to all of this is privatization or public-private partnerships. We also see that Sri Lanka's annual losses because of climate change is estimated at $300 million. But even though, this is about 4% of the country's GDP, but we don't see this being addressed within the budget allocations or there are we are trying to spend more on mitigation or adaptation. And with the IMF austerity, we also see how this weakening climate justice also through fertilizer and the credit cuts that we for the farmers or the smallholders. And on the other hand, when it comes to the country's food production, we also know that there are rice mafias, there's monopolies with the local businessmen who are creating more unfair and unjust systems as well. And because of and also through the IMF austerity, we had to reduce our energy subsidies, and utility costs were increased. So this meant only in 2023 alone, more than 1 million families lost access to electricity. And also because of this, we are unable to allocate enough funding for disaster response. And as usual, women continue to bear unpaid care burdens. Meanwhile, through some of the policies that we see about changing labor laws, we suggest that more women should be included in the labor force while completely ignoring the unpaid care burdens. And we also see the risks of disaster capitalism within this. Soon after Cyclone Ditwa, the president Anura Kumara Dissanayake appointed a committee for rebuild Sri Lanka. So this included mostly businessmen, and it lacked grassroots representation. Women, farmers, fisheries, anybody who actually works or that their lives are integrated with nature were excluded, and also the people who were directly hit by the disaster were also included. And when we have this climate disaster and austerity that is bundled together, that opens doors for land and energy privatization and mega projects, sometimes labeled as green mega projects, that are continued without consent, free, prior and informed consent of the people. And we also see land acquisition by external parties. And in terms of how national policy gaps closes doors for justice, I think it's important to understand that there is a massive disconnect between policy and what happens on the ground. The latest nationally determined contributions suggest that we're going to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 20% by 2035. But Sri Lanka only contributes less than 0.08% from the global carbon emission. And I think the correct figure should be 0.05 to 0.08%. But still, we are pushed to cut down greenhouse gas emissions. And I think the major issue here is that we tend to look at climate change only through this carbon, only through carbon emission. But now we talk about triple planetary crisis, which includes pollution, biodiversity loss, and carbon emissions. So carbon emissions is only one side of, or one part of the climate change or climate crisis, but there's massive emphasis on carbon. And even our NDCs, which should ideally be protecting our own mountains, our own biodiversity and ecosystems, we end up promising to cut greenhouse gas emission, even though we contribute very less to the global emissions. And our climate finance strategy was recently given cabinet approval, the 2025 climate finance strategy. Let's look a little bit deep into it later. And we have also promised to have 70% renewable energy by 70% to increase renewable energy for 70%. This is some of the climate finance mechanisms that is currently in operation. Some Green Climate Fund, coastal resilience is focused, and drought adaptation, and UNDP and WFP supports Sri Lanka for women-led enterprises, especially in Aurelia and Polonnaruwa districts, and GEF and UNDP, we see climate resilient water management. But we also see, World Bank, again, resilient infrastructure, improving more, looking at more adaptation methods, and renewable energy projects through Asian Development Bank. So the problem here is how much of this funding, how much of these projects have actually improved the resilience on the ground. And these are only the projects. I have taken some examples from the funding that we have received after 2020. So there's a lot of dominance or a lot of projects aiming at adaptation, but very little at mitigation. And the climate finance strategy of 2025 uses 12 tools, all market instruments. And again, it needs to be questioned how much of this is actually being transferred into action on the ground. And because of the IMF and the IMF extended fund facility diverts funds for debt servicing, which means we'll have to use most of our funding or our money to repay the debts. And that means we do not, like our climate budgets are underfunded, right? And like I mentioned earlier, though we have climate-related losses that accounts for about 0.4% of the GDP, we do not have that requirement met through the government, through this funding. And this is a case study that I would like to talk about. This energy project, the wind power project in Mana, that was initially funded by the Asian Development Project, has displaced a lot of fisher communities. There hasn't been no proper consent taken from the people. People complained that they were tricked into giving consent. And these are minority communities on the other hand. So there's the language issue where the language that they speak or their grievances are not heard, not only by the authorities, but sometimes also by the people, the majority people who don't speak their language. And Mana is an island with, it's a district with about 5 protected areas. Mana Island itself hosts 3 protected areas. So all of this biodiversity and ecosystems are also threatened. But this project is a renewable energy project. This is a wind power project. So this means it's green, right? So if you're opposing a green energy project, it's very easy to get called out for, being supportive of coal or, fossil fuels, unfortunately. But it's really important that just transition is redefined to understand that it doesn't only mean that, we provide jobs for people who are going to lose jobs because of renewable energy projects. It's much more than that. It's about people and land. It's about understanding that whether we are going to call these projects green or renewable, if they're going to harm the environment and the people, there's nothing environmentally sustainable about that. We also see a similar patterns with the solar farms in Hambantota, where there was an elephant drive recently, which contributed massively onto the human-wildlife conflict that is already experienced by the farmers in the area. And also the agricultural policy gaps, because at the end of the day, whatever that we do, the final results are going to be on food, and without food sovereignty and without food security, we are unable to face any of the disasters. So this is going to be something that we're going to experience after DITWA as well, given that massive lands, a lot of land were destroyed, a lot of agricultural lands were destroyed as well. So we continuously see that industrial agriculture gets pushed through, and smallholders, farmers are not supported, and we depend a lot on imported food, and we completely exclude indigenous and traditional knowledge when it comes to food as well. So I'd like to explore how the grassroots and justice-oriented pathways are formed within these oppressive systems as well. So there are community seed banks and traditional rice revival through agroecology networks led by youth and women. And there's like resilience that they show beyond growth models. And especially within, we've seen through the Green Revolution that was introduced to Sri Lanka, there was like, heavy reliance on chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers, and the seeds that we used to grow and the crops we used to grow were changed as well. So there's youth and women who are trying to change this. And we've had traditional mixed crop cultivations that supported biodiversity. We had this ancient Wawa. We are in hydraulic civilization where there was uh, uh, where a lot of man-made reservoirs, especially in the dry zone, were used to get water through the irrigation systems to the paddy fields. And we also had like this forest farming that would protect the watersheds, and traditional home gardening systems that would protect biodiversity. So it's quite important, given the landscape of the country and the climate threats, that we prioritize traditional policies or look at indigenous systems as much as when we are looking at climate solutions. When we're looking at climate solutions. So women farmers, and these justice movements have also been receiving seeds, and there are anti-displacement struggles where farmers and especially people in the areas like Mana protesting to protect their lands. And also we have seen this this immense amount of care and this lot of resilience through care and support for the people. Like especially of Cyclone Ditwa, we saw this this volunteerism, people coming together from the areas that were not affected to support other people. And I think this shows who Sri Lankans are, and this also shows what Sri Lankans are capable of. And I think it's really important that we tap back into traditional knowledges and the community knowledge, and also citizen scientists, to understand how we should move forward from this point onwards. And I'd like to highlight some of the climate policy, like why climate policy fails to deliver justice. Right? We tend to prioritize growth, not only because that we like to do so, but also because we are forced to do so. Because of the debt crisis, we are in this place where we have to prioritize economic growth, right? And if we are to get into a place where we are capable of repaying our debts, that means we must grow our economy. And to grow our economy, what we need to do is use our natural resources and to use our labor. So this growth model is not sustainable. It's not sustainable for Sri Lanka. It's not sustainable for the South Asian region. It's not sustainable for the whole planet. We cannot, this very famous quote about that we cannot have infinite economic growth on a planet with finite resources. So I think it's quite important. I mean, I know it sounds like a very simple thing to say, but at the same time, this is the crisis that we've been seeing, and we are still being pushed towards this direction. And especially when it comes when we have to prioritize economic growth, we end up putting people last. So this is what austerity means. This is how austerity works. We cut on social spending, we cut on subsidies given to people, but we push us on economic growth. So this also weakens our sovereignty as a country and the people's sovereignty through some of these debt deals. I've been following closely the debt negotiations that happened in 2024. I mean, we have agreed on to some of the agreements, or some of the things that we've agreed on to do not favor us at all. As an example, we have agreed, especially with the private creditors, that they can change the governance law if as they wish, right? And this means that if there are rules and regulations being push through the UN agencies to stop vulture funding or stop some of these creditor companies to profit on giving loans, they are able to move these loans to another jurisdiction. So, I mean, that's just like one example, but like, this has to be a whole nother presentation on debt itself. But through these climate policies and through these debt policies, we are not focused, or we are not prioritizing women or indigenous communities, minorities, or the smallholder farmers who are actually the backbone of our economy. And if we really want to look at climate justice, these are the principles I think that we need to look at. We need to look at sovereignty of food, seed, water, and the energy. We need at least 50% of participation of the affected groups if we are going to rebuild the country to be more inclusive and to be better. And displacement should be reduced. And we need to look at restoration of extraction. And we also need to look at debt justice. Why debt justice is linked to climate justice is like, from various methods. One is countries like Sri Lanka, especially like, also the other countries in South Asia are paying for the pollution and the climate change created by more industrial development countries. And also some of these private creditors that has given us credit at very high interest rates are also the ones who invest majorly on fossil fuels. These are the same companies who also invest on energy, invest on weapons manufacturing. And the other thing about, like I mentioned earlier about this, like, tunnel vision on carbon, what it ignores is that raw emissions are never calculated, right? And how can we accept this as like, as a model that focuses on justice when it excludes very important parts of emissions? And if we want to look at justice-oriented roadmap for Sri Lanka, we need to look at restoring our ecosystems, including wetlands, the reservoirs, and mangroves. And it's really important that we look at free, prior, informed consent of the locals, especially when it comes to renewables, that energy should be owned by the people, not the government, not the private corporations. And looking at bringing back seed banks, protecting our seeds, and agroecology strategies. And it's also really, really important that we hold polluters accountable. We hold the development organizations, we hold the private sector, we hold the government or the politicians who pushes polluting industries, and also that we are transparent in the finances, not only about how we disseminate aid, but also about who gives us aid and how this aid is coming through and who's giving this aid on and what and with what intentions. I will stop there. And I think I took a little bit over the time that was allocated. Over to you, Swarna. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was uh, every one of these presentations has opened up a new set of issues that we haven't talked about. And considering we've been talking about this topic for 8 days now, that it tells you how much there is to learn and discuss and to share. The floor has been open and there are already comments and questions. So I'll quickly go there. Uh, the first is a comment from Deepak Gyavali, who spoke on Nepal. Glad you introduced the horrible issue of forced loans and privatizations in the name of countering climate change. It is neocolonialism, pure and simple. Public-private partnership is its vehicle when we should have public-private civic partnership. Is Sri Lanka too, like Nepal, being lured into taking loans for climate change adaptation and mitigation measures? Your expanded views. I think that's a big enough question that I'm going to leave you to answer that first. But you want to unshare your screen.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much for the question. And I think, yes, because currently we are not looking at, when it comes to climate finances, we are not looking at any type of compensation, any types of reparations. So the only avenue available is through either aid or through debt. So given the catastrophe that we have faced, given how much infrastructure is destroyed, given how much that we have to spend on rebuilding, definitely there will be more loans, more money that would come as loans. And this is quite unfortunate because I believe that Sri Lanka is in a unique position to actually lead climate justice for South Asia, for the region also, given how we were pushed through, pushed to this debt crisis as well. I mean, Sri Lanka's case is unique in many ways because it's not only how debt deals happened, but it's also how our default happened, and also how the austerity was imposed without really understanding, without we did it in such a short time that we cut social expenditure in massive amounts in such a short time. And this is all because of the pressures from the private creditors and the organizations like IMF. So I think, yes, we do risk being pushed towards into taking more loans for climate adaptation as well.
The second question is from Riddhi Chakrabarti. Sri Lanka has got one of the best road conditions in South Asia, as I noticed in my visit a few years back. Question is, don't you think the onus is on post-independent governments to address these issues? And then in her reiteration, she clarifies, rather than going back to history and colonialism.
Yes and no. Because, like I said, I don't think that we can avoid national level responsibilities, given that we have a history of politicians who were acting on self-interest. And in 2022, people of the country took it onto their hands to chase this away, chase these politicians away. So the national level corruption and national level uh, mismanagement was criticized and questioned by the people. But at the same time, it came back again onto policy because our constitution allowed a man to become a president who who was not voted in by the people, right? So yes, it is the responsibility of the post-colonial governments of Sri Lanka, but at the same time, none of these governments also had their hands free. In one way, they were corrupt and they were benefiting from these projects. And on the other hand, there were external parties that were benefiting from these projects as well. So one of the examples is, again, if I'm to go back to debt, Sri Lanka first went to the commercial bond market. We first borrowed from the commercial bond market in 2007. So this was 3 years after tsunami, one of the worst natural disasters that we have seen. And also while we had a ethnic war going on in the country, right? And it was still advised that it was a good decision to go to the private markets and borrow at a very high rates. So there are responsible parties within the country, within national levels, but this is not like none of these issues are linked, they stay within the nation state borders. So this corruption goes beyond, but yes, we do have parties that need to be held accountable within the country, but also outside. I hope that answers the question.
I also think that both in Deepak's question and in your answer, you're talking about neo-colonial measures rather than historical colonial practices. There's another comment question from Deepak Gyavali. I have also got a huge problem with carbon trading. The issue is not economic benefits, but moral problem. How can one acquiesce to someone not mitigating but exporting pollution via trade to poor countries?
Yes, I agree completely. Yes, there is. I think it does have a both economical and a moral problem. Mainly the moral problem, that how I see it is that it really pushes these Eurocentric waves, uh, which suggest that nature is something that can be owned and traded by people or the governments, right? But especially in South Asia, or at least within my country or how I grew up, I learned that I am part of nature, not that nature is something that I can own and sell, right? And I believe this is common to majority of the people who work with the land, be it farmers or fisheries or plantation workers. And uh, the moral question I see is that, and also like you very correctly mentioned, that exporting of pollution. Not only that this exports pollution to poor countries, it also uh, limits how poor countries can spend on their climate resilience, right? So when we receive money through carbon trading, that means they dictate how this money is going to be spent in Sri Lanka. Like we have a lot of these restoration projects focused on wetlands, because Sri Lanka, Colombo is a Ramsar accredited wetland city, and wetlands have more carbon potential, right? So a lot of money ends up going there, but not really on what is needed on the land, right? So this is how this, like, especially the market mechanisms, again weakens a country's ability to spend on what's really needed when it comes to climate resilience. I hope that is sufficient. Oh, we can talk more on that, because I think, this heavy focus on market solutions and technological solutions without addressing the systematic barriers are really deepening the problem.
I'm just going to ask you, I'm going to add on to that. For somebody like me who is not every day reading about or thinking about these more technical questions, what would be an investment in carbon? What is it? What is carbon areas with more green cover like the urban areas? Is that what you just said? Versus investing somewhere else. Can you give me an example of investments that would be a trade-off, just so I can understand more clearly?
Yeah.
I think I may
Yes.
not even have repeated what you said correctly.
No. So the problem with carbon trading itself is it treats carbon as this exchangeable product, right? So as an
Hmm.
example, say that I have a polluting industry and I emit, let's say like 100 tons, uh, let's just say per day. And then I would invest in a country somewhere where there's say that protects a wetland, where we would estimate that this much amount of carbon would be protected. So I would set off my pollution, my polluted emissions versus
Hmm.
the amount that is protected. So which means, on the other hand, is I purchase license to pollute. I pay to protect
Right.
an area somewhere else, and then I purchase license to pollute, right? So this is not going to limit or reduce pollution.
So
That is
my
the problem.
question is
And on the other,
that if we're doing that,
Mhm.
then what? So a company that is, say, supporting a project to protect a wetland within the cities or something,
Mhm.
or say Kandy or Colombo,
Yeah.
what might it be doing instead that would be
Uh,
better
it, yeah, it
within
depends. It
within
depends.
Sri Lanka?
Yeah, it depends on the requirement, right? So, given the current context, we would say that we do need more climate resilience infrastructure. And we are also looking at, the Sri Lankan president has mentioned in the parliament that they would relocate or remove all the illegal settlements which are 5,000 kilometers above the sea level, right? So these are massive amount, massive costs. So it's not about what you really spend on, but this is about the transaction. The question, the moral question that was highlighted earlier by
Mm-hmm.
Deepak is also about treating this as a transaction, treating this as something that I can purchase a license to pollute, that I can continue to pollute and think that, okay, I have done my part by paying to protect the forest somewhere else. That is the moral
Mhm.
question. It's not about really how that
Right,
can be
right,
done better, but it's about the issue with the transaction. I hope that
right.
is clear.
Yes, thank you. Kiran DM has a question. Madam, thank you for the informative presentation. And my question is, was it financial colonialism or plantation colonialism that had the greatest impact on Sri Lanka? Can you share with some comparative examples?
Uh, can you please repeat that? I was trying to.
Was it financial colonialism or plantation colonialism that had the greatest impact on Sri Lanka? Can you share with comparative examples?
Yeah, I think both plantation colonialism and financial colonialism had impacts on the country time to time. So initial plantation colonialism, what it resulted in was massive amount of deforestation. And we saw how these lands, which were once pristine forest, were turned into either tea or like initially coffee, then tea or rubber plantations, right? So like I mentioned during the presentation, there was also labor exploitation. And these industries cannot make profit if they pay their workers well. So they cannot make profit if they don't exploit the land. So that is number one. So in a very simple view, also, if we look at it, our best soil, the best part of our land soil is used to produce a product that is to be exported for people in the West to have a cup of tea in the evening. It does not produce something that is actually needed or uh, that fulfills a basic food requirement or a basic requirement of the people of the country or even anywhere else, right? And another angle here is something that I want to add is we have private companies who are the pioneers of the tea industry who are also leading the discussions on climate dialogue. So they are the ones who do most conservations. They are the ones who issue a lot of publications. They conduct dialogues. They call on meetings. So they are the pioneers of the discussion about uh, protection of the nature as well, while their business itself is exploitative of the environment and also the labor. So that is one. And about financial colonization that started happening with the open market, I think it pushes more and more people towards these views of extractivism. So, especially uh, within the socio-economic context before this, like financial colonization, we had mostly farmer and fisher communities, and we would we would farm two seasons mainly, right? And there were lots of time people had for resting as well. But now we are on this route, like, you are not allowed to rest. And if you are resting, you are lazy, right? So it, I mean, the financial colonization actually had an impact not only on the land, but also on the society, on how we looked at our lives or our goals, our hopes. What do we need in life? What do we need to be content? So all of these things were changed through financial colonization too. So I actually don't see these as like two different things, rather two steps of the same process, if that makes sense. Thank you.
I'm going to invite Chamika Vijay Surya from the Regional Center for Strategic Studies, who has been patiently co-hosting with me for the last 8 days. She works in this area, and so I'm going to ask her to come in for a minute and highlight
Thank you.
anything that she'd like to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swarma. So I want to quickly extend gratitude to both you for organizing this type of very illuminating series, and people who have been talking this far in the series. Me and both the Regional Center for Strategic Studies are very grateful for everyone who work this tirelessly for this common issue. And I think Melani Gunathilaka really holistically captured both like international, local, like how this issue really impacts everyone across and she captured how development both local and international like link to neo-colonial enterprise. So it was a very holistic presentation today. I think all the other presentations were very holistic as well. They gave a lot of details, technical and social, in every way. So I just wanted to highlight one aspect like this, especially like this whole series has highlighted, and especially today's discussion also highlighted this connection between the like what scholars, eminent scholars from South Asia have been talking about, like Mahabubul Haq and Amartya Sen have been talking about this disconnect between international development and human development, especially in South Asia. So taking a very regional overview of the issue, I think like for us, for everyone working on the issue, as well as people who are like working on ground level, like Melanie, we have to look at kind of empowering the community. That is my overtake from each of the speakers who have spoken. Like I think I especially remember the speaker from Bangladesh talking about how the community in Bangladesh takes a massive role in climate adaptation as well as disaster risk prevention mitigation. And yesterday's speaker from Pakistan, Afia Salam, highlighted that we can all learn from Bangladesh. Like we can all take that lesson into us, and like even though there can be a disconnect connect between governance and people and communities, at least like I think some institutions are like working to climate change, for climate change adaptation as well. So like sometimes it's related to international funding, lack of funding. So like it's very slow. So at least what we can focus, like make them focus, is like empowering communities, giving them like the technical knowledge that they can use to strengthen their uh, how homes and livelihoods. So that is the my take from everyone's input. So thank you so much for this, and for the
Thank
opportunity.
you. And on that note, I'm just going to read out Rakhi Suryaprakash's comment. It's terrible the debt eco-colonization is pushing for unsustainable development and more debt. Hope Sri Lanka comes through the burdens of debt and adverse devastation. On that note, I'm going to close today's session. Thank you very much, Melanie, for doing this. I know that you have prepared and come here and been with us in the middle of relief work um, outside elsewhere in the island. So I'm really grateful for that. We will meet tomorrow for the final session of this series, also to mark 40 years since the signing of the SARC Charter. We have a speaker on the regional overview of all of these talks, and, sort of suggest where we go from here. But we also have a very special guest, and one that I had scarcely expected or hoped that we would have. We have a former SARC Secretary General join us for a few comments at the end of the scheduled speaker, and we will have an extended discussion. So tomorrow's session will be 90 minutes and not 60. Of course, if you have to leave, you have to leave. But I just wanted to let you know that. Thank you, everyone, for coming to attend this. Thank you, Melanie, very much. And good luck to you with the relief work.
Thank you so much
See
for
you
having
all.
me. Thanks, everyone.